not forget to start it again. Admit, yes. Admit.
Firstly, thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing with you the first beautiful New England spring day. How to begin? It's such a joy to have a dear friend and colleague here visiting with me, with us for this dialogue, but it's also difficult. Where do I begin to share with you how I feel about the person to my right, who is a beloved companion along this journey? So maybe the best thing to say first is thank you, Eboo, for being here. Thank you for the groundbreaking work that you've been doing and continue to do. Thank you for being my friend. And thank you for making time today. You have other engagements. And this is really an act of chesed, of loving kindness. I'm going to start with a wordless melody in Nigun. You can hum and chew at the same time. You can sit quietly, but since I'm on my home turf, and I need to relax a little into being as present as possible to this experience, I just want to sing. And the people online, you can sing too, as long as you're muted. Reverend Rob Shank, I see you. And you are brilliant and courageous, but do not sing out loud. Don't you dare. Thank you. So I'm going to start in the following way, which is not with the book specifically, but with a significant decision on your part and the part of your staff to change the name of your organization, which you had been running exceptionally well for 20 years. It formerly was called the Interfaith Youth Corps. And then roughly 18 months ago, it's hard to keep track of time during and after the peaks of COVID, you made a name change. And that name change also has come with a renewed and expanded vision. So can you say a word about the discernment process about making that change, given that you were doing, as I said, exceptional work, and what it means? Because you are a person that takes language seriously, and names matter.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here. And let me just say just how grateful I am for this friendship too. Really deeply grateful. And this is my first time at this campus of Hebrew College. So I probably visited the other one about 6 times. Or love to refer to it as the city on a hill, right? The John Winthrop's, the nice part of John Winthrop's vision. Not the Calvin's Geneva part, but the nice part of Winthrop's vision coming to life in that hilltop. And you've taken the essence of that and put it here. And so it's just always nice to be with you and nice to be in this space. So Interfaith Youth Corps was invented by, 5 people back in 1998, and 40% of us are in this room, my friend Jenny Peace and I. they're at the founding and really co-founders of the vision, of the original inspiration, and were part of the kind of original leadership team for 3 or 4 years. And then Jenny had other things to do, like, pursue tenure track work at a variety of places. And I didn't have that much else to do, so I stuck with this. But that's actually kind of true, it's kind of true. But the original vision back then was, we were at the United Religions Initiative Global Summit, summer of 1998 at Stanford University. And there were, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 or 12 young people there, probably a conference of 500 people total. And the 22, 23-year-olds were there, like Jenny and myself. There were thoroughbreds racing through our systems, right? I think kind of common for 22-year-olds. And in some ways, at least I came to this interfaith conference looking for, the current generations, Thich Nhat Hanh, or Malcolm X, or Abraham Joshua Heschel, or Dorothy Day, or Jane Addams. And mostly it was senior theologians speaking from panels, which was not, I mean, I should have expected that, but that wasn't like my vision from what, what I had hoped interfaith work was. And a group of us basically were like, hey, listen, where are the young people? Where's the vanguard energy? Where's the focus on social action? And I was kind of rude about it. Other people like Jenny were much nicer about it. And there were people there, particularly a woman named Yolanda Trevino, who said, hey, what you're saying, this notion of an interfaith initiative that would center young people in social action and have a wider range of diversity, you should build that. You should build that. And we did, we did. And in so many ways, the Interfaith Youth Corps ran a series of programs on college campuses and in seminaries with folks like Elise, who at the time was at Illinois Wesleyan and is now at Tufts, with Orr, who is here. And in like a lot of nonprofits, we just kind of grew program by program, year after year. So it starts with an interfaith leadership group, which has now morphed into, I think, the nation's leading interfaith leadership program called BILI, which Orr really spearheads. And then we did an annual conference, which we still run, called the Interfaith Leadership Summit. And then we started to do developing curriculum. And so you kind of grow program by program. And part of what a good organization does is you don't leave the good programs behind. You continue running them. You get better at them year after year after year. And then you thoughtfully add another program, right? And so it was kind of like a college in that way. In some ways, like adding courses or departments. You start off with an English department, then you add history, then you add biology, and so on and so forth, right? And then somebody comes to you and says, this could actually be really useful in healthcare. The big idea is the positive and proactive engagement of religious diversity could make a big difference in higher education if students and faculty are taught and engaged in making faith a bridge of cooperation, not a barrier of division, and articulating faith as a source of inspiration, right? Become very good at that in the context of a religiously diverse democracy. Well, healthcare is an extremely religiously diverse sector in which religion really matters. What would it look like to offer a similar vision in healthcare and to train folks within that arena to do this and to develop curriculum there? And so we did that again in partnership with Orr. You'll hear this as a refrain. We launched a major initiative during the early months of the vaccine called the Faith in the Vaccine Ambassadors Initiative. 2,000 people trained to advocate for consideration of the vaccine within their religious and racial circles and congregations. And then you start thinking to yourself, well, wait a second, there are other areas of American life, massive civic institutions like the YMCA, Habitat for Humanity, Catholic Charities, Jewish federations, in which religious identity really matters. There is at least some religious diversity, and there's a lot of partnership around religious diversity. And those networks, right, in disaster relief, in refugee resettlement, those networks could do with a vision, a strategy, leadership training, curriculum, and the like around religious diversity and interfaith cooperation. Well, what about the private sector? And so we actually kind of started adding these programs, I would say around 2015, 2016. So in some ways, you think of a university as a model. You start with a college and you grow the number of departments there. but that still focuses mostly on 18 to 23, 24-year-olds. But then you start adding professional schools. You look up one day and you think to yourself, well, we have a law school, we have a business school, we have a medical school, right? So Interfaith Youth Course still lives within Interfaith America. And I would say that our programs focusing on young people and on colleges, which is to say undergraduate populations 18 to 24 roughly, they are as vibrant, if not more vibrant than before, right? It's just that we now also have these other major initiatives. And if I could just say two other things on this. One of the things we think about a lot is the origin of the term Judeo-Christian. Right. So one of the jokes I like to make, Elisa's heard this before, is when the pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, they dusted off the stone and they saw the words Judeo-Christian etched there. Right. And you have all these like really smart 19-year-olds who did excellently their SAT, thinking to themselves, did I miss that in history? You know? And then, of course, that's not what happened. So where did the term come from? Right? Is it in the New Testament? Did God give it to Moses on Sinai? You know, did he merge in the Protestant Reformation? Where did this term come from? And you realize it was invented. Well, every term is invented, but when was this term invented? It was invented in the 1930s. It's pretty recent. Why was it invented? It was invented as a response to the anti-Catholicism and anti-Semitism and racism of the 1920s, of the KKK 20s. And the 20s was like an ugly period. Like the KKK had 4 million members. Like there were mayors and governors who were part of the KKK. It was a powerful organization. And after the KKK torpedoes Al Smith's candidacy for president in 1928, the first Catholic to run on a major party ticket, a group of individuals, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, come together. They call themselves the NCCJ, the National Conference for Christians and Jews. And they basically say, we cannot forfeit America to a narrow racist Protestant vision, right? Let me just say, not every Protestant vision is racist. That's not what I'm saying, right? But a particularly narrow racist Protestant vision, white Protestant vision, which is what the KKK was, right? And so they had an image of America that like had a hold on lots of people. Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that great liberal lion, famously says at one point, America is a Protestant nation. The Jews and Catholics are here under sufferance. That's how deep the vision is. And they know what they have to do is shift the paradigm. So they do what Jenny and Elise and you all and Or and I do, which is they run a whole set of civic activities. They do this in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of communities across the country. But they also invent a term. What's the term? Judeo-Christian. They literally invent it. Didn't exist before, right? So now we know that Judeo-Christian has kind of been co-opted by the ideological right, but that wasn't the origin of it. In the 1930s and 1940s, it was an expansion of the imagination of America. So we live at a time of virulent white Christian nationalism. Is this also an opportunity to articulate a different, more beautiful, more expansive vision? What would that be in a nation that now has as many Muslims as ELCA Lutherans, twice as many Buddhists as Episcopalians? We liked Interfaith America so much, we renamed the organization after it, right? So it is also an articulation of a vision for the nation. I'm going to say one last thing. I know I'm talking a lot here, but this is why I invited you. I think this sets some things up here, which is, listen, there are a number of great issues in America, right? Environmental preservation, racial equity, women's empowerment, civil rights, civil liberties. Every single one of those has major national institutions dedicated to their advancement, like major institutions, like 100, 200, $300 million institutions, right? The Urban League, the Sierra Club, the NAACP, on and on and on. Religious diversity is a great issue in American life. Interfaith cooperation is a great need in American life. And this work deserves major national institutions, not Scooby Snacks, not a couple people here and there, but like ACLU type major national institutions. And we wanted to basically put a stake in the ground of like, we're not going to be shy about this. And I don't mean that as like, our goal is not to be the Walmart of this, right? Our goal is to be a part of a vibrant and growing field that is making the case. Religiously diverse democracy is hard. You have to be very proactive about making sure faith is a bridge of cooperation and not a barrier of division.
If this were a Passover Seder, I would say Dayenu, which means it is enough. You hit several of the high points and did so in your usual eloquent way. One of the things I love about you is that you're trained as a sociologist. You have a keen interest in history. And part of what you just demonstrated is the need to learn from the people and the organizations that came before us. And so when you mention the NCCJ, I think about two people that are very dear and absolutely essential to Hebrew College and to the Miller Center. One of them is the Reverend Howard Thurman. Some of you have probably not heard of Howard Thurman, but Howard Thurman was the first African-American minister to be the dean of any program at a college or university in the United States, and the first person to be the dean of a chaplain that is a ministerial position at a majority white university, that being Boston University. And in 1955, he had a young Chabad Lubavitch student by the name of Rabbi Zalman Schachter, who wound his way into Marsh Chapel. And it is on the shoulders of people like that that we're doing this work. One of the stories that you tell in your book and that you've been telling in other contexts is about a conversation you had with the former president of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I want you to share that story because it's not about great luminaries, but it's about your family.
Yeah.
It is a part of your personal narrative. A personal narrative is a core pedagogy in this work. And I think it helps to explain and further elucidate your passion for the work and the possibilities.
Yeah, thank you, Or. I just quoted Howard Thurman in a commencement I just gave at a college. He has what I think is the most beautiful line of what a college should be. He says this about his alma mater, Morehouse College. He says, Morehouse places a crown above your head and challenges you to grow tall enough to wear it. Right? Like that's what a college education should do. Right? You should leave a college education taller than you came in, not smaller than you came in.
Just because we're geeking out for a moment, and I think you'll love this, he heard that line at his college graduation.
At Morehouse.
At Morehouse.
Wow.
From the president of Morehouse. And imagine for a moment what that must have felt like to him and all of these Black men.
Yeah.
Many of whom were the first in their families to graduate from colleges.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's powerful. No, it's powerful.
Just geeking out for a moment.
I love it. Now you know what our phone calls look like. I think I forgot the. Oh yeah, Notre Dame. So it's funny. My son just turned 16, and my dad, who's like a semi-professional photographer, had this, this trove of like 16 years worth of photos they put into a slideshow and sent to all of us. Lots of tear-jerking moments. My son's comment was like a third of them were taking in Notre Dame. And he's like, this weaves us through generations, right? Like this is a generational thing for us, right? So we're an Ismaili Muslim family. And this, what I like to colloquially call with due respect to Boston College, I like to colloquially call the American Vatican, which is what Notre Dame is, right? Like it nurtures generations of this Ismaili Muslim family from India. And I have these very early memories of going to Notre Dame with my dad, who was an MBA student there in the late 1970s, going to football games, and we would stop at the grotto, and my dad would kind of very respectfully stand there and cup his hands in a way that, like, honestly, he did not do at home. Okay, like my dad is a devoted Ismaili Muslim to the tradition, but not at all a ritualistic one. So I'm not accustomed to him like doing like one of these at home, right? But there he is in front of the grotto, like doing that, like some Western Wall stuff going on, seriously. And and he's saying the Fatiha prayer, which is the opening prayer in Islam from opening of the Quran. And I kind of like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And actually, at one point, I'm 10 or 11 years old. I'm a little frustrated. I want to get to the stadium earlier. What are we doing standing at the grotto, right? And I decided I'm going to like throw some Muslim knowledge down and beat my dad. I'm going to get to the stadium earlier. I said, you know, this is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It's Catholic, and we're Muslim. We shouldn't be here at all. Let's go watch football. Of course, the irony is the stadium is presided over by touchdown Jesus, right? You cannot get away from Notre Dame. My dad points out that there's a whole chapter on Mary in the Quran. And he points at all of these candles in the cove of the grotto, which is what the grotto is. It's a cove of candles. And he says the Quran describes God as light upon light. You know, look at the candles flickering in this grove. And then as we're walking to this, you know, I'm like, you know, appropriately toucheed. And as we're walking to the stadium, he says, look, you're going to encounter all kinds of things in your life. And my suggestion to you is don't look for the areas of difference, look for the resonances. Look for the, and he didn't say the commonality, he said, look for the resonances, right? Like look for the places where like, there's like positive and beautiful energy, you know? And then it stuck with me. And for all kinds of reasons. One is Notre Dame is unabashedly Catholic. Like at the end of the football game, like in the middle of the fourth quarter, they say, if you want to celebrate mass, it will be in the basilica. They are not saying, we have students from all different religions here, so we're going to talk less about this. We have students from all different religions here. We're very proud of that. You know, maybe the best defensive player in Notre Dame history was a Mormon, right? Manti Te'o from Hawaii. And it is a part of it. It is the reason they're here is because we're Catholic. The reason they're here is because we are Catholic, and we're going to be proud of that. And I actually met once with Father Hesburgh, who was the giant who led Notre Dame for 50 years, right? And really built it from a modest Midwestern school into an international powerhouse. And I told him the story of my dad and how my dad felt so kind of spiritually alive there as an Ismaili Muslim. And I said, what is it about Notre Dame that would take pride in announcing mass at the end of a football game to the whole stadium, and also having Muslims who are here feeling proud of who they are? And Father Hesburgh says to me, Catholic means two things. Large C Catholic means fidelity to a particular church and a particular path. Small C Catholic means universal. We live at the intersection. And I thought to myself, that concept is in every religion. In every religion, there's a concept of kind of a large L Lutheran or large M Muslim, right? Like there's fidelity is something particular, right? A particular theology, a particular doctrine, a particular ecclesiology. And then there's small m Muslim, which is submission to the will of God, right? Which there's a universality to that. And there is an intersection there of fidelity to that particularity and openness and welcoming and enriching that universality. And what's interesting is like Father Hesburgh did not read a little Thich Nhat Hanh and come up with this, right? I mean, he's a celibate Catholic priest, right? Total devotion to the tradition. And this is the insight that he has from deep within the tradition. I just found that very and formative for me. Like, I mean, so I wasn't going around telling my friends this story when I was 12 years old, but I think is the older I get, the way the recognition of like, boy, this was formative. Like this is how you approach your own faith and others.
I think it's an example of what Nietzsche once described as living life forward, but understanding life retrospectively and understanding the layers of our own narratives. So you just gave a beautiful definition of the Miller Center. I don't think I could describe why we do what we do any better than the description of Notre Dame and a Catholic with a capital C and a lowercase c. And it reminds me of a conversation that Jenny and I had several years ago, where we both said, one of our dreams in our respective religious communities would be that people came to understand that interreligious and cross-cultural engagement is not an additive. It is part of the definition of what it means to be a faithful Jew and a faithful Christian. And it was part of an ongoing conversation we had with the then president of Andover Newton Theological Seminary, Nick Carter. He was a wonderful pioneer and mentor. He said, this work has to be arterial to our institutions. It has to become arterial to our visions of faith and fidelity. And you said it beautifully. Here's another question related to several things that you've said and several conversations that we've had over the years. You have a very sharp intellect. You're an incisive person, but you insist, as the title of this book suggests, that we spend more of our time and energy in the realm of resonance, not flattening into commonality, but resonance, than we do in the realms of criticism and deconstruction. And that, I think, is the orienting point of this project, and really has been the orienting point of your work for as long as I've known you. And perhaps as you talk about that, you can concretize it in part by sharing with people at least a glimpse or a glimmer of this next chapter idea, which is one of your big ideas. Eboo doesn't have small ideas. So talk about that next chapter, but as it relates to this orientation that you have, this inclination. In Hebrew, we might say mystically or Kabbalistically, you emerge from the sphira of chesed, of grace or mercy or kindness, where there's flow. There is a place for gvura, for rigor, and for judgment. But you have remained true to that impulse. So share with us a little bit, if you would.
So I want to spend a minute on this notion of building versus critiquing, and I want to do it in a personal way with the moment where Jenny and I kind of were inventing Interfaith Youth Corps back in 1998, and at least my personal experience of that, right? And this is just my personality, right? So other people in that circle, the 6 or 8 people around at the time, they probably all had different experiences of it. But as I said, I was like really rude about getting into people's faces at that conference. And I was actually like, that was not my first rodeo. I was good at getting into people's faces. And
Jenny, don't laugh so loudly.
And when Yolande says that to us, Yolande, she was there with a friend of hers that now a mentor of mine, Joe Hall, you like, hey, you should build that. There's the negative space there is interesting. Like what she didn't say was very interesting, but I heard loudly what she didn't say, which is basically like, why are you telling other people what to like? Why are you telling other people to do this? You should, like, you have an idea. You should build that. Right. And why was I telling other people what to do? Like, why is it a reasonable thing to be walking around constantly telling other people what they're doing wrong? Like, if you have a better way of running a school, you should go run a school. Totally serious. Right?
We have a few heads of school or former heads of school in the room.
Like if you have a better way of coaching same school, you should go coach a team, yes. Right? And I think the several thoughts that I have, again, in retrospect, but I felt the emotion of it at that moment was, why does our culture give points to people who are telling other people what they're doing wrong? I'm going to say that, like, why are there any points for that whatsoever? Why is that like a skill to aspire to? I am good at telling other people what they're doing wrong. So what? So what? Do it better. That's where the point should be. Do it better. Number 2, could I? That's the hard part, right? Like, what if you try and you suck? And as I reflected on that, part of what I wondered was, boy, is this the reason I'm so loud? Is this because the more in your face I am, the less likely you are to like put a crown above my head and inspire me to grow tall to achieve it. Because it's just not worth your energy. It's just not worth it, right? So am I like self-sabotaging myself here? Because I kind of know if I'm rude and in your face, you'll just escape as quickly as possible. And part of what that might mean is complimenting me first, right? But I just won't build anything then. And so what Yolan does and what Joe Hall does, I mean, it's actually like it's like a great act of grace and kindness. And I just wonder in the current era, how much of that is going on? How much of that is going on? And I have to tell you something, like, it is really hard to build something. It is really hard to build something. But there is nothing more, there is no equivalence between the satisfaction of telling people all the reasons you can't do something and actually doing something, right? Like doing something is way more satisfying than telling people all the reasons why you can't. Just put that energy into doing it. Just put that energy into doing it, right? And you think to yourself, well, wait a second. If somebody else could build an imperfect institution, I can build an imperfect institution, right? If somebody else can build an above average school, I can at least give that a try. And actually, I think that there is an awful lot of religious wisdom. It's so what's like the religious manifestation? Like, what is Hebrew College? What's the Jewish Federation? What's Catholic Charities? What's Southern Baptist Disaster Relief Services? What it is it's an institution to an idea. So what religions do is they articulate an ideal, right? So in Christianity, it's the kingdom of God. In Islam, you might say it's din and dunya, the intersection of like faith and world. What would it be in Judaism? Like, what would like the equivalent of the kingdom of God be?
Mashiach sight. I want to hear you say that.
No. My Arabic's not that good. Sounds very Arab. And what the people do is build institutions which seek to both be microcosms of Mashiach, right? And prods to get closer. So why do Muslims build beautiful gardens and fountains? Because that's what we believe is in Jannah. That's what we believe is in heaven, right? So you're trying to build manifestations on earth of what the ideal is. So in other words, it's just a totally different orientation. The orientation is not, I'm going to walk out of my home today and tell everybody what they're doing. Tell people all of the ways that the system is messed up. Did you think the system was not messed up? Right? The orientation that I think religion facilitates us towards is, what is the ideal? And how can human beings build attempts, imperfect, concrete attempts at that on earth? And if you think about American civil society, like half of our civil society is built this way. So just think about the institutions of higher ed in Boston. Who built Harvard? Congregationalists. Who built Tufts? Unitarians. Who built Boston College? Jesuits. I don't know who built BU, but I would. What? Okay. So, I mean, just think about this for a second, right? Like, our civil society is built by faith communities erecting institutions to an ideal. And you know what? None of us realize this. Like, literally, right? Like, you don't wake up in the morning and think to yourself, boy, if all of the institutions founded by faith communities in this city disappeared overnight, what would we have? I'm really happy those people of faith built. But we live in their world. We live in their world. Let me tell you one quick kind of very small concrete story of this, right? So I'm going to be really like, you might like me after this. You might not like me after this. I can spend a lot of time with faith communities who are like, we are so sorry about our privilege. Like, what are you sorry about? Like, I'm grateful for everything you built. I'm an immigrant here. I'm grateful for everything you built. Now let's go build better things, right? Like, did you think the thing that you built in 1950 was gonna be perfect for 2020? No. All right, so let's build a 2020 version, right? Like, let's build this stuff, right? But I come here in the 1970s and I'm grateful for all that. I go to your schools, I play in your little leagues, I go to after school care in your YMCA's. I'm grateful for that. And now I'm doing my version. Okay, so let's do it together, right? So I'm like saying this to this group of like junior pastors of the largest Presbyterian church in Indianapolis. And they do not like me complimenting what their church has done over the decades. They've just come on staff and all they want to do is like find stories of like all the terrible things their church has done. I'm like, I promise, I guarantee you the church has done terrible things, but I've probably done some pretty positive things too. And the senior pastor is like this very kind of, you know, he is mellow and placid and kind of a step back kind of guy. But at some point he says quietly in the Zoom, just very quietly, our church built the public library system. And all these junior pastors just keep going about like, we did this, and then we did this, and we did this. And the senior pastor says again, we built the library system in the city, Indianapolis. It's a good library system. And I'm like, how many of you knew that? Nobody knew that. But a public library, it's a pretty important thing. Right? So my point is, what does it look like to build the infrastructure, the civic infrastructure for 21st century diverse democracy? Let's just do that.
Let's do it. So one example of the way that we are trying to do it collaboratively, and we have tried a whole slew of different experiments over the last almost 20 years, is through the BILI program. So I just want to spend a moment talking about what Eboo mentioned before. It's an undergraduate fellowship program for students from across the country. There's information in your packets about the details of it. But part of the inspiration for that fellowship for me as a Jewish person were two models of fellowships in the Jewish community that have yielded a large number of the most significant Jewish leaders in our community. One being the Bronfman Youth Fellowships Program for students who are rising seniors in high school. And the other is the Wexner Fellowship Program for Jewish professionals in training, where I first encountered one Jennifer Weinstein. And both of those are designed for people that are passionate and committed to leadership. And we are trying to do the same thing with the BILI program. And I want to thank the Reverend Tom Reed for leading it so ably for the last 5 years. We started in Boston with 8 schools. We have now worked with 25 schools, from Puget Sound to Tufts to Stanford to the University of North Florida to DePaul. And it is an investment, and it's a costly investment. But if we talk about building bridges and creating infrastructure, we need the next generation of people to step forward. And Eboo and I, in different ways, sort of clumsily found a way into this field. Howard Thurman and Reb Zalman were pioneers and virtuosos. Neither of them really had interreligious mentors or curricula or contexts in which to sit in deliberate ways and think about case studies and so forth and so on. It's part of the reason why I've remained at Hebrew College, because I'm committed at once, as you said, to the particularity of what is beautiful and lasting about Judaism, and also because I think it's urgent that rabbis and cantors and educators and youth and anyone and everyone else who calls themselves Jewish is involved in this great project of religious pluralism. So one of the projects that you've been talking to me and a few others about is what you're calling a next chapter. So can you talk about that and why you think it's so
Yeah.
important in light of some of the figures that I just mentioned?
So yeah, the reason we do this work, right, is because I just want to reiterate something that Moore said is part of what faith communities do so well is they think to themselves, oh, okay, so there are people, we need people who get up in the pulpit and preach every Sunday or Saturday. We need people who are able to do religious rituals. There are some gifted people early in our history who were able to kind of learn by themselves and put themselves in that position. But if you want to be able to do that with any regularity and for generations, you have to have institutions which prepare those people. So you need to have that for interfaith leaders also, right? In a religiously diverse democracy, if you want faith to be a bridge of cooperation and not a barrier of division, if you want teams of religiously diverse healthcare professionals, disaster relief professionals, social service folks, business people to think it is part of who they are, theologically, but also by way of national ethic, to work positively together. You have to have a group of people who are building that, who are architects of it, right?
Exactly.
And so I think one of the things that's very special about Hebrew College, and this is true of wherever Jenny Peace happens to be at the moment, whether it's Andover Newton or Tufts or wherever, it is a local institution which is able to do national projects. Right. And BILI is one of those national. So this is like, it's the Wexner Fellowship of Interfaith Leaders. And Or has learned from a number of different models, some of them in the Jewish community, some of them early things that we ran.
Yes.
And Or came to me a couple of years ago and was like, look, there needs to be a fellowship, 30 to 40 undergrads every year of people who are going to think of interfaith leadership as a vocation. And you're going to wake up in 10 years and there's going to be 500 of them. And they're going to be, the next leader of the reform movement, the next president of Notre Dame, the next person who is the provost, let's say, to the college, the first Muslim college in the country, et cetera, right? That's the group of people that you're nurturing. And Or had this vision, and we basically are a partial funder of it. That's how much we're a nonprofit organization that is a partial funder and a programmatic partner of this vision. And I think part of the hope is like, that should be something that every year there's a class of 40-ish undergraduate interfaith leaders who go through this rigorous program. And you think about what America could look like in the decades to come with that group of people. That's powerful. The second thing we've been talking about together is just how central Black Jewish cooperation has been in American civilization. So I love to do the exercise of like, imagine if this didn't exist, right? Imagine if like the Karnofskys didn't hire an 8-year-old Louis Armstrong in New Orleans in the late 19th century. Imagine if they never bought him his first cornet. I mean, like American jazz music is literally developed by this Black kid at the table of this Russian Jewish family, listening to their lullabies and like assimilating it all into his genius being, and then taking the cornet that they buy him and he puts his lips to it and music comes out, right? Like that's like the centerpiece of American civilization right there. And if you want to go back a little bit to slave fields of the American South and go pre-jazz and go to the blues, there are many scholars who think that the blue note, which is the bending of a note, right, in music, it comes from the bending of the note in the Muslim call to prayer. Hayyan al-Salah, Hayyan al-Salah, Hayyan al-Falah, Hayyan al-Falah, the Hayyan. It's the bending of a note, right? And so that kind of contribution of diverse Black Americans and then the partnership between African Americans and Jews, who had the first racially integrated swing band in America. Anybody know who's the band leader? Benny Goodman. Right? Howard Thurman and Reb Zalman. Who was the partnership, the Black Jewish partnership, who built 5,000 Black schools in the American South? The great American philanthropist that nobody's ever heard of. Anybody know who he was? Julius Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington. Built 5,000 schools for Black kids in the American South. There's a time in American history where a third of the Black kids in school in the early 20th century were in schools that were funded by Booker T. Washington as the educational designer and Julius Rosenwald, the funder, right? It's probably not an artist, a Harlem Renaissance artist you can name who did not have a Rosenwald Fellowship. The collaborate, and by the way, notice we haven't even said King and Heschel yet, right? But the collaboration between African Americans and Jews is a centerpiece of American civilization, from music to education to civil rights. You know, so the question that we want to ask is, what's the next chapter? This is what previous generations have built together. This is what previous generations have built together, and it was a step forward for their time. What can African Americans and Jews build now, particularly if they understand this history as a narrative? And many people know a chapter. They'll know the King and Heschel story. They'll maybe know the Billy Crystal Muhammad Ali friendship, right? They'll know that Fred Davey ran Ruth Messenger's campaign for mayor in New York, right? But to think of it as actually part of the arc of American civilization, part of our inheritance, and then to ask the question, what's the responsibility for the next chapter? That's a huge thing that we want to contribute as an organization, Interfaith America. And actually, Boston is one of the launch sites for this. And so we're Jenny Peace and her colleague Peter Levin at Tufts, along with Elise, has asked us to make a plenary presentation on this for a conference they're doing on democracy in July. The notion is, what if this took root in multiple cities across the country? What if there were leadership groups of African Americans and Jews thinking through this history, this narrative arc, adding chapters that we've never heard of? But you know, if you think about the kind of overarching category, there's probably dozens or hundreds of other important chapters in there, partnerships between African Americans and Jews, right? And then asking the question, what does this look like now in 2023? So part of, I think, what it means to have vital, strong institutions in interfaith cooperation is that you can run your signature programs over and over and over again. You teach your classes over and over again, right? But then you also can creatively come up with programs that meet the moment. And BILI is one of the programs that meets the moment and that we hope lasts for eternity. Every year, America is going to need a class of exceptional young interfaith leaders who go through a rigorous program and who think of interfaith leadership as a vocation. And we think that this Black Jewish Fellowship, this Black Jewish Next Chapter program, kind of meets a moment where, you know, some folks with access to the public airwaves and put into the atmosphere this notion of a rift between these communities in a way that I think just it obscures the far more important story of cooperation.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, when Eboo first told me about it, I, spending more time in academic settings, was immediately ready to be critical and to point to all of the scholarship about the missteps of many of the people that you just mentioned, in all of the ways in which their work was only partially successful. And it's exactly what you are talking about. We won't proceed with this project with rose-colored glasses. We won't obscure, to use your term, the fact that these dynamics are sometimes complicated, socioeconomically, racially, etc., including the fact that the Jewish community is now beginning in ways that they truly have never before to understand that African Americans are not outsiders, they're a part of the Jewish community. So even the term Jewish and African American needs to be interrogated. But as Paul Ricoeur, great French philosopher, says, that critique has to be a phase or a stage, not the end point of the work. So how do we uplift, right, these chapters? How do we recognize and learn from the heroes and the sheroes in their partiality? And then, as you say so beautifully, how do we lean into what comes next? Particularly in a moment where globally, nationally, and within these communities, people are sowing seeds of division. Of course, there needs to be criticism. Of course, there needs to be discernment. But then, as you said so powerfully before, what comes next? what are we actually building? So I'm really excited about another big idea from Eboo and company. I'm gonna open the floor, as it were, see what kind of questions you have, reflections, a lot of smart, thoughtful, hardworking, beautiful souls in this room. So please don't be shy. Or we can turn this into a Quaker. Celine Ibrahim,
Yes.
the
Hi,
ground school.
everyone. I wish I could be there with you in person, but this is a
Go
good
for it.
substitute. Good to see you. I'm wondering, Eboo, what you see in terms of race relations in the Muslim communities, right? Because there's a certain there's certain way in that the interreligious work in my case has helped me come to the intra-religious work with a new lens. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing on that note, and where you see this renewed interest in Black Muslims and in the long history and the history in the US. I'm just seeing where you see that playing into the work of Interfaith America.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Quite, Celine, is there anything in particular that you want to? Nice to see you, by the way. Assalamu alaikum. Is there anything in particular that you're thinking about in that question, or just kind of generally speaking?
Yeah, I'm just wondering in general. I feel like it's often an issue that falls off the collective Muslim radar, and then will just come back on when it, when Muslims, we're in a complicated place because we're dealing with the xenophobia, but also trying to look at the internalized kind of dynamics around colorism in our own communities. And so I'm just sort of wondering what you're seeing in your collaborations and your from your vantage point, and just hearing you talk about this next chapter, looking at the Black and American and Muslim or Jewish experience, and where is there room to weave in the long-standing collaborations of Muslims in those spaces?
Oh,
too?
yeah. I mean, the answer to that is absolutely. And so we've been running this cool project for the past couple of years called Black Interfaith. I don't know if you've heard of it, Celine, but we've had a couple of big events at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Black Interfaith is basically, it's kind of a positive 1619 project for religious freedom and interfaith cooperation. It's basically saying, what if we thought of interfaith cooperation as a Black story and not a white story? And what if its origin point? What if its origin point wasn't just the Flushing Remonstrance or Roger Williams, all of whom are important characters, right? But what if we thought of the presence of Estebanico in the 16th century as the origin point of interfaith cooperation? He was a Moroccan, a Sufi Muslim who was enslaved as part of a Spanish expedition. But when the Spanish expedition gets captured by Native American tribes, it is Estebanico's Sufi kind of rites and ceremonies that have him understood by those tribes as a medicine man, as a holy man. And so he kind of moves into this position of leadership, right? And that's kind of an interfaith set of moves, which is basically the rites and ceremonies and the chants and the prayers that come from my tradition can be useful to your tradition also. That's a really interesting, different starting point. Right. And so you start to think of the interfaith story as not a white story with a chapter called Martin Luther King Jr. You start to think of it as a Black story, and you include the blues in that, and you include a Howard Thurman in that, right? And you start to populate it with these other figures. The blues meaning that the American blues, which is the fountainhead of all American music, very likely comes from the prayers of Muslim slaves in American cotton fields. It is kind of a paradigm shift for how you think of the contributions of Muslims in America. And it makes me think of actually a line from a non-Muslim African-American, James Baldwin, who says, "I am not a ward of this state. I am one of the first Americans who arrived on these shores." Right? So a paradigm shift. What if you put African Americans at the center of the story of interfaith cooperation and play the story out from there? And I absolutely think that's going to be set. So we've been running that for the past few years, and it has been super interesting. right? It's been super interesting to have academics like Yosef Soret, who's the dean of Columbia College and Columbia University, and Jonathan Walton, who used to be the dean of Memorial Chapel at Harvard, is the new president of Princeton Theological Seminary, for them to kind of share their scholarship, but and also their views on this. And I absolutely think that's going to be infused in this new Black Jewish project. And by the way, like until you telling the Howard Thurman story, like that wasn't super salient for me, right? I know it, but it'd be I mean, Boston in so many ways is like the perfect city to launch this, right? The city on a hill, and also the city in which a university started by Methodists, a white Methodist, makes an African-American the dean of its chapel, and it's at that university where the kind of leading light of late 20th century Jewish mysticism meets an African-American Christian mystic. And by the way, also where King gets his PhD, Boston University. You know, it is interesting to think of this university as a launching pad and a laboratory for Black Jewish next chapter work.
Yeah. I just want to point out that in this room and online, there are people that are contributing to this project in different ways. So I'm looking diagonally at the back of the room to my friend and colleague Sagan, who is one of the few African-American ordained women Zen priests and studying at Boston University's graduate school for religious leadership and part of the Miller Center team. Like, could my grandfather or your grandmother have imagined that we'd be sitting in this room having this conversation? And of course, you know, part of it is, as you talked about, the evolution and the unfolding of these stories, including greater attention to what we now call intersectionality, and the ways in which race and religion, right, dovetail, and the possibilities, and to reckon with pain and suffering, but also with possibility. What are we going to build? Imam Taimullah Abdur Rahman, who's offline because he has a bad cold, runs this amazing program in a local mall called Spentum, as in you've spent your time behind bars, and does such beautiful holy work with young African-American men and those at risk. And it comes out of the depths of his commitment as a Muslim to justice and peace and compassion. And it's storefront. And it is proudly Muslim, and it is interfaith and intercultural and interracial. And people just don't know yet about these stories. And these are going to be a part of the chapters to come.
At least Sagan, I think Sagan has her hand up. I just did not. Jenny's blocking the view.
Just so people online can hear you. Yes. So Sagan and then Elise and then you know others.
So I have a comment, I think, and then also maybe a question that I'd be curious to hear you speak to. One of the comments is I've been thinking lately about Frederick Douglass and his sort of his speech about what to the slave is the 4th of July. And I've been rethinking that lately. What would I say to him today? What would my response be? What is the slave's descendant? You know, what is the 4th of July to me? And part of that is giving myself permission to reimagine myself as a part of the foundation of the country, right? And my values, my family's values, the faith journey of coming from a family who we know someone was enslaved by a Methodist minister. So the idea that reconciliation and interfaith work is literally in my bones and in my family's experience matters. And the values of cooperation and love and hope, that those can be seen as part of the fabric of the country, but I have to be able to articulate that and find a way to include other people in understanding that maybe if we come from that standpoint, then that also shifts like how we think of our country in terms of like what our national values are, right? And then that's a struggle, right? Like that's different. So one thing I'm curious about is you've spoken and Or has spoken of these stories that I imagine many of us know pieces of and many of us don't know. So do you have thoughts about developing curricula or finding ways to really make these stories more known and having this kind of history, this kind of archival storage be an active part of like ongoing pieces of BILI or other programs that you have? And then the other is I just was using your book, Interfaith Leadership, and this framework that you offered of an interfaith triangle, sort of knowledge and relationship, and that's it. Thank you. As this like framework for discovering whether or not our work is working, right? And I wonder if you speak to like an idea of multi-faith or interfaith formation for people who cross religious boundaries and for people who are just interested in articulating that they are formed spiritually by multiple traditions. Rather, sort of be a step beyond just interfaith dialogue towards actually considering interfaith formation as someone's core identity. That's a lot. So whatever pieces of it.
I mean, I just loved all of that. Thank you. And the spirit in which you said it. Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you for that. So a couple of things. One is in this book, and We Need to Build, I kind of do a summary of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, which basically I think gets at the first part of what you were saying, right? And also the Frederick Douglass speech, which I just, for whatever reason, happened to reread recently. And so I just happen to remember the last line of the speech. I'm not sure how fresh this is for you, but the last line is, the beginning is like these niceties. He's in Rochester, New York, you guys are gathering here today, da, 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 da. And the middle is basically like, you guys are a bunch of white people. Think about what this looks like to me. And it is tough. And then at the end, you know what he does? He speaks to, and I quote, the greatness of American ideals and the genius of her institutions. It's stunning, right? And you think to yourself for a second, now, not everybody has to adopt that, but nobody can ignore the fact that Frederick Douglass, born into slavery and lives as a slave, is going to speak at the end of his speech about the greatness of American ideals and the genius of our institutions. Can't ignore that, right? So what do you do with it? Oh, you can't just take the middle part of the speech, and you can't just take the end of the speech, right? But it's interesting, he ends it there. He ends it there. And I think that may mean something for what he wants future generations to think about.
By the way, in King's most famous speech, I have a dream speech. First half of it, of course, is a very strong critique of American culture and history, and then shifts.
Yeah.
And having had the great privilege of sitting with Vincent Harding, who was one of King's chief speechwriters, for 15 minutes at a conference, I asked him about that. He said, of course, right? We have to face the pain, and then we have to turn our attention to what can be done.
Look, the speech is not called I Have a Problem. It's not called I Have a Critique, right? Like you can do that, right? But because in the last 6 years, there has just been a heavy metal of critique, right? It's considered intellectually sophisticated. And so I don't think it's a bad thing to be like, there is another way. There is another way. And there's like lots of people who have pointed to that other way. And one of them is where Frederick Douglass lands the speech. It's where Baldwin lands the Fire Next Time. The beginning begins with how, just like the experience of white racism in America as a Black man, particularly a Black gay man, and just the anger that erupts. The middle part of the book, again, it's all summarized. There's a chapter in here that summarizes it. The middle part of the book is the story of him being invited to Elijah Muhammad's dinner table, early 1960s, summer 1963, and sitting at his dinner table, right? It was anger that brought Baldwin to this dinner table, and he's thinking to himself, boy, I do not want to live in your world. If this is what the alternative, if this is my only alternative, I don't want this, right? That's a very interesting question to ask. Like, do you want to live in the world of the clinics? What is the world that would build? And is it closer to Mandela's world or closer to Robespierre's world? And Baldwin's like, I don't want that world. Okay, then what do you have? And that's where the paradigm shift takes place for Baldwin. That's where the great line, I am not a ward of this state. I'm one of the first Americans to arrive at these shores. What if I thought of myself as a founder? What if I thought of myself as a founder? And it is my spirituals baked into this nation's civilization, right? I could have called this country a lie and said that it was hopeless, but I call this nation a broken promise, and I've given my blood, sweat, and tears to fix it. Now that's a worthy cause, right? And so I just think that it is a powerful thing to present that as a founding narrative with a, as we would say in Islam, with a very powerful Islam, with a very powerful chain of transmission. Hope does not come from nowhere here. Hope comes from the Kings, the Baldwins, the Frederick Douglasses, and to build a narrative out of that. And actually, the first set of concrete things we want to do in the Black Jewish Project, please let us know if you want to help with this, is we want to create a series of videos that tell the Black Jewish story, right? Like we have this set of very inspiring, like 2 to 3 minute videos. That's the attention span these days that show that we put up at the beginning of all of our presentations on campuses, and et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, this is what an interfaith democracy looks like. Here's a 2-minute video. And we would do a series of videos. Here's the narrative of Black Jewish cooperation in American history. And here's a collage of what the next chapter could look like. So yes, we absolutely do want to.
I just want to add 2 points, then Elise, please jump in. One is this notion of a genealogy, I think, is so important, and it's something that religious groups understand and value greatly. None of us comes from nowhere. And the truth is that oftentimes leaders and followers in religious groups could preach and live out messages of compassion and of kindness to their own, but found it much more difficult to do it with people who are considered outsiders, which makes having a genealogy of interreligious sheroes and heroes, of pioneers, of people that experimented and partially succeeded, all the more important. Because we all need to be, as Abraham Joshua Heschel said, both inheritors and innovators. And there aren't enough stories collectively in our canons writ large about people that were willing to take the risk to cross a threshold and make themselves vulnerable and to learn with and from other people, which is why you will soon learn that in the BILI program, the very first text we study is the encounter between Reb Zalman as a young person and the Venerable Reverend Howard Thurman, including a moment in the story where Reb Zalman says, retrospectively, I thought this man was the janitor because I met him at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was 1955. He was wearing blue jeans and a casual shirt. I'm a Lubavitch chassid who narrowly escaped the Nazis. What do I know generally about the quote unquote non-Jewish world and about universities and colleges and race relations in this country? And I think he included that detail in the story so that all of us would take note of our biases, but it isn't the beginning and the end of the story. It's a part of the story.
When Interfaith America first came to me, I thought I'm never gonna be able to say that. It's IFYC. But now I have to remember that it's IFYC.
Right.
So congratulations. I think it's really been a powerful and very effective transition because the vision is so strong. And what I'm particularly excited about is how the higher ed piece can bridge into other subjects. Because year after year, I have worked with students who are on fire for interfaith work across disciplines, and they want to do this. And some of them naturally want to go to grad school, divinity school, student affairs, but that's not the right place to do interfaith work. Last year, I have a student who's working in Kendall Square in biotech, and she is passionate about celebrating religious diversity in her workspace. Another student, and this has connected us to the Dignity Project, Sagan and others, who's in a Boston Public School, who wants to bring multi-faith leadership into the work that she's doing as a teacher. So what I'm wondering is, will you be building some pathways into the professions to allow for students to seriously bring this leadership
Yeah,
into these fields?
yeah, that's a great question. Get some steps in. I loved it when you were in Bloomington Normal, but I have to say it's not so nice to see you in Boston. You know, at least thank you. So that is a huge part of this, and actually one of the funders for our kind of continuing leadership work at Interfaith America is the Lilly Endowment, and their commitment, of course, is to faith formation and young leaders. The reason that they're funding our like mid-30 something fellowship programs, we now have a ladder of fellowship programs, right? The BILI program is our partnership with Hebrew colleges, kind of the undergraduate fellowship program for undergrads. And then there's kind of a, within the first 2 to 5 years of graduation, innovation fellows. And then we have kind of a mid-career program for people in their 30s. It's kind of Wexner-esque.
Yeah.
That's what Wexner is, right? So we have a ladder of them, and we actually just had a convening of that group of people just this past weekend. Probably 36 people of our, we call them emerging leaders, although at this point, they're like, I mean, we've emerged. Right? Some of them are like, I make more than you do, dude. Like, you know, I could hire you, you know. But one of them, this is like, you know, blew my mind when I heard it. He's from England. So I'm like, hey man, the King's coronation, the interfaith stuff, pretty amazing. He's like, yeah, I did all that. Nadeem Javid. He is Mayor Khan's senior advisor. He's Mayor Khan's first public event, Mayor of London, is in a synagogue. This is 6 years ago. That's Nadeem, you know, and he organizes not just symbolic events in other faith communities, but the recognition that the civic infrastructure of virtually any society is built by faith communities, and that needs to not just be recognized, but strengthened. So Nadeem is the Mayor Khan's guy on this. And when there's a royal transition, there's one person in British politics who understands the importance of diverse faith communities and their contributions. King Charles, since he was Prince Charles in the early 1990s, has been saying, I feel like the defender of faith, not of the faith. That's a line from the early 1990s. Prince, I happen to know this because the Aga Khan and King Charles are close. And so I kind of keep tabs on this. But it's one of our alum who designed all of that. And there's probably not a ton of jobs in royal interfaith transitions. But it is, right, it is a good example of how interfaith knowledge and skills are actually very professionally useful in a number of contexts. Let me give you like one super relevant one that happens all the time and we never think about, but if it went wrong, it would be really bad, and that's disaster relief. So who do you think the largest players in disaster relief are, or refugee resettlement? They're religious players. So they're Baptists, Catholics, Mormons. They have very different doctrines, very different ecclesiologies. So if you are a senior at the Red Cross, part of what you're doing is learning how to coordinate between those groups. And not just kind of in an organizational way, but in a theological way. Knowing how to speak their languages, right? Those are like skills and employment opportunities. So absolutely, we think there's kind of a supply side and a demand side, that there's, as Chris Coble at the Lilly Endowment said to me once, he's like, look, you have a generation goal, right? We have a network of 600 active campuses who do some sort of interfaith work as a result of a partnership with us. That's like potentially hundreds of thousands of students who have at least had a taste, many of them more than a taste, going into a business world, healthcare world, a civic infrastructure, et cetera, with some knowledge and skills of how to do this. That gives me some hope,
Or I just wanted to, oh, great. I just wanted to harken back to the spring gala that we had at Hebrew College on Thursday evening, which was really a glorious evening, in large part because we had 3 incredible women speak, each at different life stages. One is Lash Nolan, who several of you heard and know. She's the first African-American woman to be a class president at Harvard Medical School. And because she's not busy enough, she's also doing, a second graduate degree in public policy. And one of the things she said from the platform and then repeated privately is that part of what she learned from being in circles like this and part of our programs, that to be a physician is not simply to be a diagnostician, but to be a healer. And that is exactly, I think, what all of us want to hear from a person who's going to be an interreligious leader and is never going to go to seminary. She did say something about seminary, the throes of Thursday night. I said, absolutely not. We desperately need you. I'm serious. We desperately need you to be involved in medical care and public policy. One of her professors, of course, then said to me, thank you, because I think she has the potential to be the Surgeon General at some point in the near future. Shruti Gupta is another person on the panel. Her remarks are in the folders you have. Shruti is a Hindu American, came with her partner to the event and is about to begin graduate programming in data science. She was undergraduate in political science and sociology at Northeastern, at BU, I'm sorry. Will never go to seminary. There's no interest in religious leadership. She will be an interreligious leader. And part of what she said to me, as we were schmoozing over dessert, was part of the reason I want to enter into the world of data science is because people like me are not often or regularly accounted for in the kinds of studies that are carried out, whether it's with big data or other kinds of studies. And we saw that, thanks to your support with so many of our ambassadors during the peak periods of COVID, including a relationship with Boston Medical Center, where policies were changed because people said, I am Latino and Catholic. I am Jewish and, of X, Y, and Z descent. Putting those pieces together and knowing what questions to ask and how to work with people so that we are creating, more inclusive and just, compassionate society. So those are just glimmers, and at least we'll continue that project. What comes next? We're blessed to have a Tom and a Shay and a Sagan and a Sheldon who have, and Rafi and David, who are all studying to become religious leaders and are receiving, intensive interreligious training. And we need those people, and that's part of what we do well in an institution like Hebrew College or the BU School of Theology. We also need, as you said, we need ambassadors and champions throughout civil society. One or two last questions or comments. I think Imam Tay is online asking a question, and of course, Jenny. Right.
Awesome. Assalamu alaikum.
Feel better.
Shout out. Thank you for this event. Shout out to everybody at Hebrew College. Sorry I couldn't be there. My buddy Or. Thank you so much for sending me the link. I'm going to read a little bit against the narrative. I just want to know this for my own self. I want to thank you first for kind of proving that Islam can be realized in a Western context. So thank you for that. And thank you for rehabbing, all of the all of the misconceptions about Islam as well. But I want to read against the narrative and just ask for my own edification. What do you do about people who you work with that might be against? How do you navigate the Israel-Palestine or the talking points for Black Lives Matter or conservative groups who may not be in agreement with the LGBTQ issue? Like, how do you navigate that? And then also, are there any deal breakers for you for those kind of issues?
Yeah, great questions. So we don't deal with anything outside of the country, right? So Interfaith America means like, we just, as an organization publicly, we just don't, we don't make public statements about virtually anything. In fact, the only public statement we made in 20 years is on the brutal murder of George Floyd. But we are a civic organization. And what I mean by that is the manner in which disaster relief is civic, the manner in which athletic leagues are civic. I define the civic in this book as that area of American life in which we generally agree on the aim, as in a school, an athletic league, a hospital, in which naturally brings together people of diverse identities and divergent ideologies. Again, school, athletic league, hospital, and that guides towards cooperative relationships. So, and I think that it's a hugely important area of American life, which is basically just a quick example: strong pro-Israel guy in my neighborhood, strong pro-Palestinian guy in my neighborhood, both have kids the same age. There isn't, like, the little league is full, like all the spots are taken, so they create a team together and they have to coach together, right? And they have strong views on things, and they want their kids to play baseball. And that's the area that we focus on. And it's not because we don't think that there are areas of fundamental disagreement, but we think you can't have a diverse democracy unless you can disagree on some fundamental things and work together on other fundamental things, right? So do we have lines? Yeah. What I would say is I'm talking to everybody, but I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale. That would be a line. That would be right. But honestly, I admire people who do. Right? There are people for whom that is their vocation. Sister Helen Pragine, that's what she did, right? And I think one of the things to just kind of think about is, if you think about the kind of era in which we live right now, right? What I mean by that is the penchant for finding the area, the thing that somebody else did, or the area with which you disagree with them, and then making relationship decisions based on that. Okay. What does Sister Helen Pragine do in the movie Dead Man Walking? Who's at the center of that movie? It's a white supremacist rapist. That's who Sean Penn plays. He plays a white supremacist rapist. And the movie is about a Catholic sister who finds the humanity in him. Could you make that movie today?
Yeah. I just want to add, Imam, since I am privileged of being in conversation with both of you, that it is important to remember, I think, that each of us plays a different role, and that each of us is necessary. So in the same way that, Shira Diener is sitting here and is exceptional with middle school children, I lasted 2 years. And when I realized that walking out of the middle school and only taking one Advil was not indicative of a vocational path for me. So we need people playing different roles, and just one simple example, we needed a Martin Luther King Jr. and we needed a Malcolm X. And so I remember, in one meeting that Eboo and I had with a funder, we talked about the different spheres and the Venn diagram. And I said, I don't have a choice when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I have to address it. I have to address it with my students, with my colleagues, and with Jewish and Muslim and Christian leaders in the community. And that's my role, right? And then I have to decide how to do that, and how much of it to do. And, you know, you have a particular role, and Eboo has a particular role. I just want to remind us of that because it is an ecosystem. And, you know, the classic models of prophet, priest, king, right, from the Bible, for example, those are different roles. And we have to think about what our roles are, given, you know, what our strengths are, what our limitations are, what you once talked to me about in terms of your sphere of influence. Where can you make a difference and how can you make a difference? I just want to throw that in the hopper. Jenny. Feel better, Tay.
So I'm at a point in this conversation where I feel like I could say nothing and that would be perfect. And yet I feel compelled to also say how much I just appreciate both of you and all that you shared today, and the way I've seen your thinking and our conversations evolve over time. And you know, I'm not even quite sure what I wanted to say changed by hearing the last two contributors, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts. But one of the other roles that we didn't talk a lot about today, but I think that happens here at Hebrew College, and it's a big part of what I was doing at Andrew Newton, is the inner formation that's necessary to do this outer work. And I think there is often a disconnect or a lack of clarity about the sort of fruits of our understanding are shown through the work of our hands. And unless we are in places where that kind of deep inner formation is prioritized in really thoughtful and careful ways, we're gonna, I think, continue to end up with some of the same flaws in the institutions that we're seeing now that were constructed in the 20s and the 30s and 40s and 50s. So I think a revolution in terms of how that kind of inner formation process happens both within our respective institutions and across those kind of interfaith reflection spaces is equally essential. But thank you for everything you guys said. It's been so great hearing you today and thinking about how all our thinking has influenced each other's thinking. So thanks.
And Jenny, I mean, I know I speak for Eboo in this one case, but you have been, you know, a friend, a companion, a teacher, an interlocutor, you know, and so many other people in the room, new and old, that are doing such powerful work. One other shout out. I asked Rabbi Daniel Klein, who's standing at the back of the room, to be here today because Hebrew College recently received a grant from the Covenant Foundation, which is a major Jewish philanthropic organization. And Daniel had this crazy notion, Jenny, feel like this, that in rabbinical schools and other seminaries, we should think deeply about the spiritual formation of the clergy that are being trained. And that requires some time and space and money to support it, because with all of the best intentions, you could just hopscotch from Bible class, to Talmud, to codes, to Hasidism, to modern Jewish thought, and then with a little bit of nudging from a person like Or, a pest like Or, you know, you'll fulfill one or two requirements in interreligious leadership. And Daniel, you know, and others had the wherewithal to take a deep breath and say, we're in the business of formation, right? I remember, Jenny, when we talked about that, and we looked across the parking lot and said, we're involved in the business of co-formation across these disciplines.
Yep.
So one of the things that I'm hoping will emerge from today, and Jenny, I want to continue the conversation along with several people, including Dan from BC, is what does it mean for us internally to be involved in the process of discernment around the formation, the spiritual formation of rabbis, particularly engaged in this Jewish project, but again, to say it must involve careful thought and reflection about relationships with the other, however you define that, so that it's not ancillary, but how you walk through the world, you know, as a religious or spiritual leader has everything to do with your understanding of what Reb Zalman called the permeability of our identities. And so it's going to be at the, you know, the heart of this program, along with, you know, all the great works of Kabbalists and Hasidim and the like.
I think this is one of the reasons I love our partnership at Interfaith America with the Hebrew College. So we don't do the political, right? I kind of made that clear. We don't do the pastoral either, or the spiritual. But that is essential.
Even though you can preach.
That's, we like,
Yes.
if a student were to come to us about his or her own spiritual journey, we probably walk 2 steps on that, and then we would refer that student to somebody who does that better. It's really sensitive work, right? And you have to be good at it. And an organization has to choose what it's good at and what it does. And this is not what we do, right? Because we respect it so much. Because we respect it so much. Right? And so that is one of the reasons for these deep partnerships is there are people who are good at nurturing the spiritual, the formational, etc. And our part of it is the civic. So I love the prospect of like a BILI fellowship, the Building Interfaith Leadership Initiative Fellowship, just going from strength to strength with a partnership like this.
Any last questions or comments? Next generation. From the trenches.
The spiritual ecology of this place and of this nation. And so I'm curious what place there is for Native religion.
Yeah, there should be more. There should be more. Like we need to lean into that more. Thank you for that. We need to lean into that more.
By way of wrap up, and thank you. Even one of the things I want to compliment you on is your honesty, your diligence, and your willingness to listen. And over the course of years, you have made a lot of noise, a lot of beautiful noise. You're bold, you have big ideas, but you also listen. You listen to your colleagues, you listen to the people that work for you, right? Including the young gay person that came to you several years ago and said, I need your help, I need your support. And to African American members of your team and in the field that said, we need to unearth this narrative. And a slew of other conversations that we've had publicly and privately over the years. So thank you, and please keep on keeping on doing you. This is a beautiful book. My favorite part was the letter that Eboo wrote to his sons. He shared with me an early draft, and I know that he worked on it several times, and it's just a beautiful intergenerational moment that's deeply personal. That encapsulates, for me at least, so much of what you carry and the light. Speaking of your father's image of the candles that you illuminate in the world. There's more food to be eaten. So from a Canadian Jew, an Indian Muslim, you have to eat more before you go. And Eboo's happy to sign books for the next 20 minutes or so. If you don't have the white book, which is one of the books that we produced, also take a copy. And there's some beautiful pieces by the likes of one Jennifer Halpease. There's a piece that I wrote there about Heschel's telegram, one of the most beautiful interreligious documents of the 20th century to JFK, about this line. Just remember that we forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes. That's what Heschel says to JFK the day before they're going to meet for the first time. With that, peace and blessings, and think about what your piece of the puzzle is as we continue to build together.
And can we also say a quick thank you to Marilyn and Kyle, who helped